My grandpa left me his cabin, the only place I ever felt safe. But my mother, Susan, gave the keys to my sister, Molly, and let her move in. They thought I was a pushover, a quiet archivist they could easily roll over. So I took them to court, and what I found out during discovery set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The grief was a physical weight, a cold stone in my stomach that no amount of tea or sleep could warm. It had been 3 weeks since we buried Grandpa Arthur, and the world still felt muted, as if the color had been drained from everything. I was sitting at my small apartment desk, surrounded by sympathy cards I hadn't found the energy to open when the email pinged. It was from my mother, Susan. The subject line was simply, "Cabin." My heart did a strange, painful lurch. The cabin. It was Grandpa Arthur's sanctuary, and by extension, mine. He had taught me to identify constellations on its rickety porch, how to properly stack firewood, and how to be quiet enough to see the deer at dusk. It was the only part of my inheritance I truly cared about. As the executor of his will, I knew its contents by heart. The cabin, the land, and all its contents were left to me, Caroline, his little archivist, as he'd written in his own hand. I opened the email. It was brief and chillingly casual. "Caroline, just letting you know I gave Molly the spare set of keys to the cabin so she could get moved in. She's so excited to finally have her own space to work on her brand. She's planning to repaint the kitchen this weekend. That awful pine color had to go. Don't worry about the utilities, I'll have them transferred to her name. Mom." I read it once, then twice. The words swam together, forming a knot of ice in my chest. Gave Molly the keys. Moved in. Repaint. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I speed-dialed my sister. It went straight to voicemail, her bubblegum pop voice chirping, "Hey, you've reached Molly. I'm probably off doing something amazing, so leave a message." "Molly, call me. Now," I said, my voice sounding hollow and distant even to my own ears. "It's about the cabin." I tried my mother next. She picked up on the second ring. "Oh, good, you got my email," she said, her voice breezy. I could hear the clack-clack of her keyboard in the background. As a bank manager, she was always multitasking. "You gave her the keys?" I asked. The words came out as a strangled whisper. "Yes, I just said that. It's a wonderful opportunity for her, Caroline. That influencer work she does requires a certain aesthetic. The cabin is perfect for her rustic chic brand. She's already got a sponsorship lined up for a mattress." "Mom," I said, standing up so fast my chair squeaked in protest. "You can't do that. The cabin isn't yours to give. It's not yours, it's mine. Grandpa left it to me. You were at the reading, you know this." There was a sigh on the other end, the long, put-upon sound she always made when she felt I was being difficult. "Caroline, don't be so technical. You live 2 hours away. You have your job, your apartment. You're stable. Molly needs this. She's trying to build something. And honestly, what are you going to do with a dusty old cabin? It's basically hers now. You should be happy for her." "Happy?" My voice cracked. "You went behind my back as the executor of the will and gave away my property." "Oh, stop with that executor nonsense. It's just a piece of paper. We're family. And as your mother, I'm telling you this is what's best. Molly needs a leg up." "And what about what I need?" I was shouting now, the stone of grief in my stomach turning into a volcano of rage. "What about what Grandpa wanted?" "Your grandfather was an old man," she said, and the sudden coldness in her voice stopped me dead. "He was sentimental. He didn't understand the real world. Now, I have a call to take. We can talk about this later, after you've calmed down." The line clicked, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any scream. I sank back into my chair, the room spinning. It wasn't just the cabin. It was the ease with which she had dismissed me, dismissed Grandpa Arthur's final wish. The casual, cruel theft of the one thing that still connected me to him. They had broken into my grief and stolen the last piece of comfort I had. I looked at the stacks of paper on my desk, my work as a legal archivist. I dealt in facts, in documents, in binding agreements. And Grandpa Arthur's will was the most binding document of all. My mother had made a terrible mistake. She had forgotten who I was, what I did for a living, and what she had just tried to take from me. The betrayal was worse than the grief itself. The next 24 hours were a blur of cold fury. I drove the 2 hours to the cabin, my little sedan eating up the miles on the familiar highway that wound into the mountains. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. I had my own key, the original, the one Grandpa Arthur had given me when I was 16, tied to a braided leather fob he'd made himself. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway, my heart seized. My mother's beige SUV was parked next to a bright pink convertible I didn't recognize. And Molly was on the porch, my grandfather's porch, posing for a photo. She had one hand on her hip, her hair in perfect waves, pouting at a phone propped up on the railing. She was wearing a new, crisp-looking flannel shirt and designer boots caked in manufactured mud. Behind her, 2 large, ugly, bright white planters had been placed on either side of the door, spilling over with plastic flowers. I got out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my boots feeling like an explosion in the mountain quiet. Molly looked up, her smile freezing when she saw me. "Oh, hey, Care," she said, snatching her phone off the railing. "What are you doing here? Mom said you were, upset." "Upset," I repeated, my voice flat. I walked past her up the steps. "Get your things, Molly, you need to leave." "Whoa, okay, rude," she scoffed, following me. "I'm literally in the middle of a shoot. This is for my job." I put my key in the lock. It wouldn't turn, my blood ran cold. I tried again, jiggling it, pushing. Nothing. "Oh, yeah," Molly said brightly from behind me. Mom had the locks changed. She said the old ones were probably rusty and it wasn't secure. She's just looking out for me. I turned around slowly. She changed the locks. "Duh, for my safety. You should have seen the one on the back door, it was literally falling off." She crossed her arms, suddenly defiant. "Look, Caroline, I don't know why you're making this such a big deal. It's just a cabin, you never even used it that much." "I was here every summer of my life," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I was here last month, helping Grandpa stack wood for a winter he'd never see. Where were you, Molly? At a festival." Her face flushed. "That's not fair, I was busy, and Mom said this was fine, she said you wouldn't care." Mom was wrong. I looked past her at the woods at the familiar peak of the mountain. I felt my grandfather's presence everywhere in the sigh of the pine trees, in the rough-hewn wood of the porch. And I felt a resolve harden inside me, solid as granite. "You have 24 hours to be out of this house," I said, pulling my phone out. "Or what?" she challenged. "You'll tell Mom." "She's the one who let me in. Or I'll have you removed for trespassing," I said, and I began to film. I panned slowly, capturing the new locks, the white planters, Molly's indignant face, her car, my mother's car. "What are you doing? Stop that," she shrieked, batting at my phone. I stepped back. "This is my property, Molly, and you are here without my permission. This is evidence." "Evidence? God, you're such a nerd, Caroline. This isn't a courtroom." "It will be," I said. I stopped recording and dialed 911. "You wouldn't," she gasped, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I am," I said. I reported a break-in and trespassing at my property, giving the dispatcher the address and my name as the legal owner. When the local sheriff's deputy arrived, a kind man who had known Grandpa Arthur, it was a mess. My mother had shown up, alerted by a frantic text from Molly. "Officer, this is a family misunderstanding," Susan declared, smoothing her blazer. "My daughters are just emotional with their grandfather's passing." The deputy, a man named Harris, looked at me. "Ma'am, you're the one who called." I presented my driver's license and the executor of will documents I had brought with me. "This property was willed to me, officer." My mother and sister entered the property without my consent, changed the locks, and have refused to leave. Susan was livid. "Caroline, you are embarrassing this family." "This is a civil matter mostly," Deputy Harris said, adjusting his hat. "But ma'am," he said to Molly, "if this lady is the owner and she wants you to leave, you gotta leave." "But all my stuff is inside," Molly wailed. "Then you can arrange a time with your sister to retrieve it with my supervision," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. My mother gave me a look of such pure venom I almost flinched. "You've made your point, Caroline. You've had your little power trip, but this isn't over." "No," I said, holding her gaze. "It's not." As they drove away, Molly sobbing in the passenger seat of Susan's SUV, I stood on the porch, the silence of the woods returning. I would have to call a locksmith. I would have to undo whatever repainting they'd started. But as I looked at the door they had locked against me, I felt a strange calm. My mother had declared war, but had forgotten one crucial thing. She had forgotten what I did for a living, and she had forgotten who her father truly was. The locksmith was expensive, but the click of the new tumbler turning under my original, grandpa-given key was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. The cabin was a disaster. Molly had only been there for 48 hours, but the place was trashed. Empty protein shake bottles littered the counter, designer shoeboxes were piled by the door, and the kitchen, I had to brace myself. Half of one wall was painted a blinding, glossy shade of millennial pink. They had painted over the hand-carved pine cabinet's grandpa, and I had refinished one summer. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, scrubbing, and documenting. I took over 200 photos of the damage, the new locks they had installed, and the pink paint. Every swipe of the sponge, every snapshot, felt like steel being forged in my spine. This wasn't just grief anymore, it was a fight. My mother, Susan, had always been this way. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else. Her role as a bank manager in our small town wasn't just a job, it was her identity. She was precise, polished, and utterly controlling. She managed money, and she tried to manage people the same way as assets and liabilities. I clearly had always been a liability. I was quiet, bookish, and had inherited my grandfather's love for history and nature, things Susan found unprofitable. Molly was her asset. Molly was beautiful, popular, and malleable. Susan had poured all her resources into Molly, funding her failed attempts at college, her lifestyle blog, and her wardrobe. Molly was a reflection of Susan's success. I was a reminder of her father, a man she found stubborn and sentimental. My grandfather, Arthur, and I were the outliers. While my mother was balancing ledgers, Grandpa and I were balancing on logs across creeks. He was the one who bought me my first antique book, who taught me that history was not just dates, but stories. He was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands, and he'd always had a quiet distrust of my mother's fast-talking, fancy numbers world. I remembered a conversation from years ago. I was home from college, visiting him at the cabin. "Your mother, she's all sharp edges, that one," he'd said, whittling a piece of pine. "Loves the idea of things more than the things themselves. Loves the idea of family but doesn't have time for the people in it. Loves the idea of this cabin, the value of the land, but hates the spiders." I'd laughed. "She does hate spiders." He'd stopped whittling and looked at me, his blue eyes sharp. "She'll try to tell you what's valuable, Caroline. Don't let her. You know what's real. You've got good roots, kid. Don't ever let her chop 'em down." Now scrubbing pink paint off a 100-year-old wood-burning stove, his words echoed. My mother didn't just hate spiders. She hated anything she couldn't control, anything that didn't fit her polished, profitable narrative. And Grandpa Arthur's will, his final, loving, defiant act of leaving his most precious possession to me, was the ultimate loss of her control. She wasn't just giving the cabin to Molly out of favoritism. She was trying to erase his final decision. She was trying to rewrite history, to correct the will to what she believed it should have been. A few days later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this Caroline?" a smooth male voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Mark. I'm Susan's friend. I'm also an attorney. I'm calling to discuss this little cabin situation and see if we can't resolve it amicably." My blood ran cold. My mother had lawyered up. "There's nothing to resolve," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The cabin is legally mine. The will is clear." "Ah, yes, the will," Mark said with a condescending chuckle. "Wills can be tricky things, contested all the time. Your mother and sister are, as you can imagine, quite distressed. They feel your grandfather in his old age may not have been, well, of sound mind when he made that particular bequest." I gripped the phone. "My grandfather was sharper than all of us combined, right up until the end." "That's a lovely sentiment," Mark cooed. "But your mother is concerned. She feels he was under undue influence." "Influence? From me?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'm a legal archivist. He was my grandfather. We loved each other. My mother is just angry she didn't get her way." Now, Caroline, let's not get emotional. Susan is prepared to be very generous. She's willing to offer you a significant cash buyout for your interest in the property, enough to make a very nice down payment on a condo in the city. You like the city, don't you? Let Molly have the cabin, take the cash, and everyone walks away happy. He sounded just like her, polished, disingenuous, and utterly dismissive. He was a carbon copy of her values, packaged in a pinstripe suit. He wasn't. Tea a friend, he was a weapon. A buyout, I repeated, tasting the word like ash. You want me to sell my grandfather's legacy. You want me to sell the place he built with his own hands so my sister can take selfies in it. It's just an asset, Caroline, don't be sentimental. That word again. Sentimental, my mother's favorite insult. Let me be very clear, Mark. Tell my mother this. The cabin is not an asset. It is not for sale. Not now, not ever. If she or Molly set foot on my property again, I will have them arrested. And if you want to contest the will, I welcome you to try. I'm an archivist. I keep everything. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline. They had formally introduced the antagonist, and he had, in one short phone call, confirmed my every suspicion. This was never about what Molly needed. This was about what Susan wanted, to win. The official-looking envelope arrived a week later. It was exactly what I expected. A petition to contest will filed by Susan and Molly, represented by the law firm of Mark, whose full name was Mark Dalton. The petition claimed, just as he'd signaled, that Grandpa Arthur was of diminished mental capacity and had been unduly influenced by me. They were demanding the will be invalidated and the cabin be turned over to the estate to be managed by Susan. They had actually done it. They were going to stand up in a court of law and slander the memory of their own father and grandfather. The rage I felt was cold and sharp, like an icicle. It cleared my head. My mother and Mark Dalton thought this was an emotional, messy family squabble. They were about to find out it was a records management problem. And I was the best records manager they'd ever meet. This was the turning point. I was no longer a grieving granddaughter. I was a plaintiff. I took a day off work and went to my bank. I emptied half of my savings, the rainy day fund I'd been building for years, and transferred it to a new account. I walked down the street to the best, most shark-like estate law firm in the city and hired a lawyer named Ms. Alani. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "They're contesting," I said, laying the petition on her polished desk. "They're claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. They've also already trespassed and caused damage to the property, which I have documented." Ms. Alani read the petition, her expression unreadable. "Your mother is the petitioner, and she's a bank manager?" "Yes," I said. "And your profession, you're a legal archivist?" "Yes." She looked up from the paper, a faint smile on her lips. "Oh, this is a mistake, a big one, on their part." "I want to fight this," I said, "and I want to countersue for damages and legal fees. But I also want to go on the offensive. I want discovery. I want everything." "Discovery, MS," Alani said, the word sounding like she was savoring a fine wine. "Given your mother's position and her role as petitioner, that could be very interesting. They've opened a door they're going to regret." My clever trap wasn't just the will itself. It was the context. It was the lifetime of proof I had. As an archivist, I don't throw things away. I categorize, I preserve. I went home and pulled out 3 large, neatly labeled archival boxes from the top of my closet. Correspondence, Arthur 1998-2010. Correspondence, Arthur 2011-2020. Correspondence, Arthur 2021 present. Inside were hundreds of letters, cards, and later, printed out emails. Every birthday card, every just because note, every rambling letter he'd sent me from the cabin. I had them all in chronological order. September 2022, "Dear Caroline, your mother is hounding me again about the tax implications of this land. I told her the only implication I care about is the shade from the pine trees." January 2023, Molly visited. Showed up in a flashy car with some young man who looked like he'd never seen a shovel. She asked me if the internet was any good up here. Stayed 20 minutes. March 2023, 6 months before he passed. Just met with my lawyer, old Mr. Henderson's son. Got everything buttoned up just like we discussed. "It's all in your name, kid. I know you'll take care of this place. You're the only one who sees it, really sees it. Don't let your mother's noise get in the way. This wasn't just sentimental. This was a documented timeline of my grandfather's mental state, his intentions, and his complicated relationship with his daughters. It was a perfect, dated, and signed rebuttal to their entire case. But Ms. Alani and I weren't stopping there. Your mother was your grandfather's secondary on his bank accounts, correct? She asked at our next meeting. To help him pay his bills? Yes, I said. She insisted. Said it was easier for her to manage it, given she worked at the bank. And the will made you executor, giving you authority over all his accounts and Ray. Cords effective at his passing? Yes, Ms. Alani smiled. Good, we're going to subpoena the full, unredacted statements for every account your mother had access to going back 10 years. 10 years? I said, surprised. Why so long? A claim of diminished capacity implies a long-term decline. They're arguing he was vulnerable for years. So let's take a look at his finances during those vulnerable years. Let's see who was really influencing him. A cold premonition trickled down my spine. My mother, the bank manager, her father's accounts, her insistence on managing things. This was no longer just about the cabin. It was about something much, much darker. The investigation was on. We weren't just defending a will, we were unearthing a history. The discovery process was a slow, grinding machine. Ms. Alani filed the subpoenas, and my mother's friend, Mark Dalton, filed motions to quash them, claiming they were an invasive, unrelated, and malicious fishing expedition. The judge, a woman with a reputation for sharp intellect, disagreed. The petitioners opened the door on the decedent's capacity and financial vulnerability, she ruled. The defense has a right to explore that. The first confrontation happened not in a courtroom, but in the neutral territory of a mediator's office, a mandatory step before the trial. The room was beige, the coffee was stale, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was me and Ms. Alani on one side of the polished table, and Susan, Molly, and Mark on the other. My mother looked furious, her face a tight mask of composure, her blazer a sharp, armored gray. Molly just looked bored, tapping her acrylic nails on her phone under the table until Mark hissed at her to stop. This is a waste of everyone's time, Mark began, smiling his slick, insincere smile. My clients have made a generous offer, a cash buyout. Let's put a number on the table, sign the papers, and end this family unpleasantness. Ms. Alani didn't even look at him. She looked at my mother. Ms. Miller, she said, using Susan's maiden name, we are not here to discuss a buyout. We are here to inform you that we will be proceeding to trial. Furthermore, we will be countersuing for all legal fees, the full cost of repairing the damage to Ms. Caroline's property, and punitive damages for the frivolous nature of this lawsuit. Molly gasped. Punitive damages for what? For libel, I said, my voice cutting through the room. For slandering my grandfather's memory, for trespassing, for willful destruction of property. Caroline, that is enough, my mother snapped, her composure cracking. You've had your little tantrum. You've made your point. Now it's time to be a reasonable adult. Mark has an offer for $75,000. That is more than that pile of sticks is worth. Take it. No, I said. 100,000, she bit out, her eyes flashing. It's not about the money, Mom, and you know it. This is ridiculous, Mark interjected. Your case is sentimental nonsense. We have sworn affidavits from concerned parties, that your grandfather was confused, forgetful, that he was isolated, that he was a prime target for the kind of influence you have affidavits from whom? Ms. Alani interrupted. Let me guess. A friend of Molly's who saw him once? A neighbor Susan spoke to? We have his doctor. We have his lawyer. And we have, she tapped a thick, bound book she'd placed on the table, over a decade of lucid, handwritten correspondence. But that wasn't the reveal. The reveal was what came next. And we also have, Ms. Alani said, sliding a single piece of paper across the table, the bank statements, the first batch. It was a summary sheet, just a simple page with dates and numbers. My mother's eyes darted to it. Her hand, which had been resting on her leather briefcase, clenched. She didn't pick up the paper. As you know, Susan, I said, leaning forward, you were on Grandpa's checking account to pay his bills. The phone bill, the electric bill, the property taxes, they all averaged about $400 a month. So, Susan said, her voice tight, So, I'm wondering why, for the last 5 years, there has been a recurring, systematic withdrawal of exactly $2,000 on the 28th of every month, a transfer. And then, starting 2 years ago, another monthly transfer. This one for $1,500. Molly, for the first time, looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is she talking about? My mother's face had gone pale, a sickly white beneath her careful makeup. That's preposterous. It was for his expenses. He had medical bills. He had excellent insurance, I said softly. I handled his medical paperwork. His co-pays were $20. No, this money, $3,500 a month, it wasn't for him. It was transferred from his checking account to a high-yield savings account. I slid a second piece of paper across the table. This one, I said, a savings account that you were the sole co-signer on, Mom. An account I, as executor, had never heard of, an account that was not listed in the estate. Mark Dalton snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it, his smarmy confidence vanishing. This is irregular, but it's theft, Mom, I said, and the room went dead silent. You've been siphoning money from your own father for years, hiding it, embezzling it. You dare? Susan hissed, rising from her chair. How dare you accuse me? I'm not accusing, I said, my voice shaking but my resolve firm. The bank records are, that's $42,000 a year for 5 years, that's over $200,000. Molly's jaw was on the floor. Mom, what is she talking about, $200,000? Susan's reaction was all the confirmation I needed. She didn't deny it. She didn't offer a plausible explanation. She lashed out. You ungrateful little witch, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. After everything I've done for this family, you were always his favorite, always whispering in his ear, turning him against me. He owed me that. I was the one who took care of him. I was the one who was there. You were the one at the bank, I yelled back, standing up. You were the one at the bank, using your position to steal from an old man, from your father. That's why you wanted the cabin for Molly. It wasn't about her. It was about hiding this. You figured if you gave Molly the cabin, you could settle up before the will was even read, before I, the executor, saw the real numbers. You were trying to cover your tracks. The mediator, a mousy man who had been silent, finally spoke up. I think this mediation is over. Susan grabbed her briefcase. This is slander. You have no proof. We have the account numbers, Mom, I said, my voice dropping. And we're going to subpoena the statements for the account the money was transferred to. Your account. Mark Dalton grabbed Susan's arm. Susan, we're leaving now. He looked at Ms. Alani, his face ashen. This is a gross mischaracterization. My client will not be slandered. They're not accusations, Mr. Dalton, Ms. Alani said, already packing her briefcase. They're exhibits. We'll see you at the trial. They stormed out, Molly trailing behind them, for once in her life silent, her face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. The aftermath of the mediation was an avalanche. Mark Dalton, realizing he was attached to a sinking ship of felony-level crimes, promptly filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, citing irreconcilable differences with his clients. Susan was forced to hire a new, less polished, and much more expensive criminal defense attorney, who immediately advised her to plead the fifth on all financial matters in the civil case. This, of course, was as good as an admission of guilt in the eyes of the probate court. But my mother was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous. She couldn't fight me on the facts, so she tried to fight me with intimidation. The locks on the cabin's new storage shed were broken. A large, ugly graffiti tag, Molly's sloppy influencer signature, was spray-painted on the side of the woodshed. I got a half-dozen, blocked calls in the middle of the night that were just dead air. It was desperate, it was petty, and it was all captured on the new trail cameras I had installed around the property. Meanwhile, Ms. Alani and I were building our case, and it was becoming bigger than I could have ever imagined. The full, 10-year subpoena of my grandfather's finances and my mother's painted a portrait not of a few indiscretions, but of a long-term, systematic campaign of financial abuse. The $2,000 a month transfer was just the beginning. It was the slush fund she'd been building. The real damage was in the investment accounts. Look at this, Ms. Alani said, pointing to a line on a statement from 3 years ago. Your grandfather had a healthy portfolio of blue-chip stocks, solid, stable, dividend-paying. On this date, your mother, using her power of attorney, sold $80,000 worth of them. Why? I whispered, feeling sick. To reinvest, Ms. Alani said, sliding another paper over. She moved the money into this. Molly's Lifestyle, LLC, a shell corporation, registered to your sister. The business address, my mother's home. It was all there. The $80,000 was the seed money for Molly's brand. It paid for the pink convertible. It paid for the designer clothes. It paid for the trips to Bali and the sponsored posts that were really just her burning through her grandfather's retirement fund. Molly wasn't just complicit, she was the direct beneficiary. All her success was a lie funded by my mother's theft. Susan hadn't just given Molly the cabin, she'd been giving her grandpa Arthur's entire legacy, piece by piece, for years. The rage I felt was so profound it left me breathless. All those years I'd scrimped and saved, working my way rough college, proud of my independence. All those years my mother had looked down on me for my little job, while she was grooming Molly for a life of fame, built on a foundation of lies and grand larceny. This led to the second confrontation. It had to be done. Molly was struggling. Without Mark, without her mother's endless river of cash, which her new lawyer had likely frozen, she was adrift. I found her working as a hostess at a local chain restaurant, a place my mother would have considered beneath them. I sat at a table in her section. When she saw me, she nearly dropped her tray of water glasses. "What are you doing here, Caroline?" she hissed. "We need to talk," I said. "When's your break?" 10 minutes later, we were sitting in her car, the pink convertible, which now had a long spiderweb crack in the windshield. "If you're here to gloat, just get it over with," she muttered, refusing to look at me. "I'm not. I'm here to give you a choice, Molly." I laid a single piece of paper on her dashboard. It was the incorporation document for Molly's Lifestyle, LLC, listing her as CEO and our mother as the financial agent. "What is this?" she asked. "That's your business." The one Mom funded by illegally selling $80,000 of Grandpa's stocks. Her head snapped up. "What? No, Mom. Mom gave me a loan. She said it was an investment from her own savings." "She lied, Molly. It was Grandpa's, all of it. The car, the clothes, the trips. You've been living on stolen money." She stared at the paper, the dots connecting with painful slowness. I could see the exact moment her world fractured. The car, but," she said. "Mom is going to lose this case, Molly. The cabin is mine, that's a fact, but the other thing, the theft, that's a criminal matter. The judge is going to refer this to the district attorney. She is going to be charged. She is probably going to jail." Molly started to cry, not her usual dramatic sobs, but small, terrified, hiccuping sounds. "Jail? Like, jail? Yes, and as the sole beneficiary of Molly's Lifestyle, LLC, you are a co-conspirator. You are, at best, an accessory to her crimes. They will come for you, too. But I didn't know," she wailed. "I didn't know where the money came from, I swear." "That's what you'll have to tell them," I said, my voice softening for the first time. "Molly, I'm here to offer you a way out. One way, you have to break from her. You have to tell the truth. You have to testify." "Testify against Mom? Testify for yourself. You can be a victim in this, or you can be a defendant. Mom used you. She used your ambition, and she used your willingness to not ask questions. She built you a fantasy life with stolen money, and she's going to let you take the fall with her." I reached into my bag and pulled out a business card. "This is Ms. Alani's card. And this," I handed her a second one, "is the card of a criminal defense lawyer. He's good, and he's expecting your call. You have until the trial date, which is in 1 week. You can either walk into that courtroom with our mother, or you can walk in and sit behind me." I got out of the car. "Caroline," she called, her voice small. I turned. Did you know about this all along?" "I knew something was wrong," I said. "I just didn't know it was this rot." I walked away, leaving her in the cracked, stolen car, finally facing a life she hadn't posted on social media. The choice was hers. The day of the trial, the courtroom was small and stuffy. It wasn't a family event, it was a probate hearing, but the air was electric. I sat with Ms. Alani at our table, a fortress of neatly labeled binders and evidence tabs in front of us. My mother, Susan, sat at the opposing table with her new, grim-faced lawyer. She looked haggard, the polished veneer stripped away, leaving something brittle and angry. She refused to look at me. Then, just as the judge was about to enter, the courtroom doors opened. Molly walked in. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young and terrified. She paused, looked at our mother, then at me. Susan gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a command. Molly took a deep breath, walked past our mother, and sat down in the pew directly behind me. A small, choked sound escaped Susan's lips. The betrayal in her eyes was complete. The judge entered. "This is the matter of the estate of Arthur Miller. I have read the petitions and the voluminous pre-trial submissions. Ms. Alani, you may begin." Ms. Alani was surgical. She established the will's validity with testimony from Grandpa Arthur's lawyer. She dismantled the undue influence claim with his doctor's testimony, who confirmed he was sharp as a tack. She presented my binders of his letters, reading his own words about his intentions for the cabin. Then she moved to the countersuit. "Your Honor, we are now going to address the petitioners, Ms. Susan Miller's true motive for contesting this will. It was not love nor concern for her father. It was to conceal a decade of systematic financial abuse and theft." Susan's lawyer leaped to his feet. "Objection! This is a probate hearing, not a criminal trial. These allegations are unfounded and slanderous." "Sit down, counselor," the judge said, her eyes fixed on Ms. Alani. "The petitioner claimed the decedent was vulnerable to financial influence. I'm very interested to see who exactly was influencing him." "Proceed, Ms. Alani." For the next hour, she laid it all out. The secret bank account, the monthly $3,500 transfers, the $210,000 siphoned from his checking, the illegal sale of $80,000 in stocks, the shell corporation, Molly's Lifestyle, LLC. With every new exhibit, my mother sank lower in her chair. The courtroom was silent, save for Ms. Alani's calm, damning voice and the rustle of papers. "The petitioner, Your Honor, didn't want the will contested. She needed it invalidated. She needed to be put in charge of the estate so she could hide this." Ms. Alani pointed to the mountain of evidence, "before the rightful executor, her daughter, could find it." Finally, Ms. Alani said, "The defense calls Molly Miller to the stand." Molly was shaking as she took the oath. Susan's lawyer tried to object, claiming familial privilege, but the judge waved him off. "Ms. Miller," Ms. Alani said gently, "can you tell the court about Molly's Lifestyle, LLC?" Molly, in a small, trembling voice, told the truth. She told the court her mother had set up the business for her, that her mother had handled all the money, that she was given an allowance and told it was an investment. "And this car," Ms. Alani said, "the pink convertible, who paid for that?" My mom did, through the company account. "And the trips, the clothes, the apartment rentals? All of it," Molly whispered. She said we were a team. She said I was the talent and she was the business. She said Grandpa would have wanted me to be successful. "And did you know," Ms. Alani pressed, "that this money was coming from your grandfather's retirement accounts?" "No," Molly cried, tears streaming down her face. "I swear I didn't. She told me it was her money. I never would have. He loved that cabin. I never. I'm so sorry, Caroline." She looked right at me, her face a mask of shame and regret. "I'm so sorry." That was it, the final public humiliation. The case wasn't just lost, it was annihilated. The judge, her face a mask of thunder, looked at my mother. "Ms. Miller," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "have you or your counsel prepared any explanation for the financial records presented today?" Susan's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client will be exercising her Fifth Amendment right regarding these matters." The judge nodded slowly. "I see." In the matter of the petition to contest the will of Arthur Miller, I find the petition to be, without question, frivolous, malicious, and filed in bad faith. The petition is denied. The will is valid. The cabin and all its contents are the sole property of Ms. Caroline Miller. I am awarding Ms. Caroline Miller all her legal fees, as well as punitive damages for the grotesque nature of this filing, in the amount of $50,000. She wasn't done. "Furthermore," the judge said, her voice rising, "I am, in my capacity as an officer of the court, referring this entire file, every bank statement, every subpoena, and every testimony, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation into multiple counts of felony financial elder abuse and grand larceny." She looked at my mother, who had gone a ghostly gray. You slandered your father's name to cover your own crimes, the judge said. You used your position at a financial institution to rob him, and you used your own daughters as pawns. It is the most despicable display I have seen in this courtroom in a decade. We are adjourned. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. My mother didn't move. She just stared at the wood grain of the table. She had lost everything. The cabin, the money, her reputation, her job, and both her daughters. It was all over. The downfall was as swift as it was total. Before the week was out, my mother, Susan, was arrested at her desk in the middle of the bank lobby. The public humiliation was the one thing she had dreaded her entire life, and it was the one thing she had so thoroughly earned. The bank fired her immediately, issuing a public statement about zero tolerance for financial misconduct and launching its own internal audit, which only uncovered more. She had been using her position for years, waiving fees for my sister, approving loans that were never paid back. She had built a house of cards, and I had pulled the one card, Grandpa's will, that brought it all crashing down. Molly, true to her word, cooperated fully with the district attorney. She was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony against our mother. The pink convertible was repossessed. The LLC was dissolved. Molly, with no money, no job, and no home, was forced to do the one thing she'd never done, be an adult. She moved into a tiny, shared apartment, got a second job, and started paying back the restaurant for the water glasses she'd dropped. Our relationship was strange. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was, for the first time, honest. She called me once a few months later. I'm waitressing, she said, as if it were a confession. That's good, Molly, I said. It's honest work. Yeah, she said, a long pause. Hey, Care, I'm really sorry about the paint and the locks and everything. I know, Molly, I said. Me too. It was a start. As for me, I used the punitive damages to hire a professional art restorer. It took 3 weeks, but they managed to strip every last fleck of millennial pink paint from my grandfather's hand-carved cabinets. I fixed the woodshed. I replanted the native wildflowers that Molly's plastic planters had crushed. I sat on the porch, in my grandfather's favorite rocking chair, with a cup of tea. The cabin was quiet, filled with the scent of pine and old books. It was safe. It was mine. The legal battle had been long and ugly, and it had cost me the family I thought I had. But it had also given me a new, profound understanding of the man who had left me this sanctuary. Grandpa Arthur, in his quiet, whittling wisdom, had known. He had known my mother's sharp edges. He'd known her obsession with money, and he had known that in leaving me the cabin, he wasn't just giving me a house. He was giving me an anchor. He had also, in his meticulous way, left me the tools to defend it. His letters, his clear instructions, his trust. He had left me a trap, laid years in advance to catch the person he knew would one day come for his legacy. My mother's trial is next spring. The DA has a mountain of evidence. She will, in all likelihood, serve time. I don't know if I will go. My piece isn't in that courtroom. It's here. I'm a legal archivist. My job is to preserve the truth. And the truth, finally, had been brought into the light. The file was closed. I looked out at the mountains, the same ones my grandfather had looked at, and for the first time since he'd been gone, the cold stone of grief in my stomach was gone. I was just at peace.